Welcome back to Inside the Paddock. Although Imola Grand Prix was canceled this weekend, we do have a very special episode for you guys today. We've got Mr. Greg King on the podcast today. He's going to ask us some questions. He's a little bit of a newer one to F1, so he's got some questions for us. It should be interesting. Here we go. Welcome back to Inside the Paddock. We'd like to introduce our very special guest today, Greg King.
Hey, what's up, y'all?
How you doing, Greg?
Doing good.
So why don't you just walk us through like what you know about F1 going into this before you did our little prerequisite highlight watching.
All right. I know the teams they're in teams of two, right? You got two per teams. I don't know how many teams there are.
10.
I mean, I know the big ones like Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes. I know they race different country every week.
Yeah, every once in a while.
Every once in a while, yeah.
Well, yeah, 10 teams. 10 teams.
10 teams
Right now. You can have more. There have been more. There have been less sometimes. But, yeah, 10 teams. So, you watched the highlights for Miami, right? And Australia, too, right?
Yeah, so Australia and Miami.
Yeah. You want to just give us your thoughts on what you learned or
Sure.
any questions?
Well, I guess first question is going to come down to I've seen a few of the races, and I know they're the teams and the two teammates. But there was a part in the Miami race where you had Verstappen and Perez both kind of going neck and neck for first place. So how's that work with teammates? Is it, I guess the second question is, how does that work with the points? Do like their points combined for the team, or how does that work?
So there are two people per team, and they get both individual points, and their individual points are combined into a team. So in the F1 standings, there are the driver's standings and the constructor's standings. So like for Red Bull, Verstappen is ahead of Perez, but as a team, their points combined are higher than any other team like Mercedes or Ferrari. So at the end of the season, there are two championship titles. So like the past 2 years, Verstappen has won. And like last year, Red Bull won as well as a team. So like it does get kind of interesting some races where the teams should be working together, but the drivers, like, they want to win, as you would in any sport. So there are some races where you'll see Perez and Verstappen kind of butt heads because neither of them want to let the other one pass. And then there are also times where they're given like team orders because like Verstappen is arguably the favorite driver of the two. So there are times where you'll see Verstappen like get more from the team than Perez. I know there was some controversy about that last weekend. So essentially they work together as a team, but they also get points individually.
Yeah, and it's not always like – so Verstappen won drivers last year, Red Bull won the constructors. But 2021, you got Verstappen winning the drivers, but Mercedes won the constructors because him and Hamilton were so close, and then Mercedes' second driver was better than Perez did. So it really is like a different – and when it comes down to it, the teams are trying to win the constructors' championship and the drivers' championship, although it is more maybe more important to them if they really have a chance at winning, like being champion of the world. Like, that's significant, but the teams are all more focused on the constructors' championship. So
Yeah, Tim, you actually well, I guess before I ask that question, then how do the points work? What do you get points for? Well, yeah, I guess that. What do you get points for?
So Kenji, you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I'll just take this one. So points are determined by like finishing position. So for example, the first place finisher gets 25 points. The second place finisher gets 18, third place gets 15, so on and so forth. 12, 10, 8, so on and so forth. Now, there's some wild cards to this. One is that whoever gets the fastest lap, as long as they finish within the top 10, they get an additional 1 point. So I think even if you don't even, if you finish within the top 10, you get 1 point for getting the fastest lap of anybody. And then also on the sprint weekends, depending on the format, I know F1 trialed a new sprint format this season, but I think the first place finisher gets 8 points, and then it goes in descending order until 8th place, who gets 1 point. So there's 3 different ways basically for a driver to get points in F1.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. I guess another question to go. I guess whenever I hear y'all talking about F1, you're always talking about how Verstappen's doing the best, and a few years ago I was always talking about Hamilton. Does it ever get boring, have the same guy just being the best the entire time, and you always kind of know who first is going to be? And is it more you're just kind of guessing who second and third are going to be, or is it a bit more mixed up than that?
Yeah, I mean, when I got into the sport, it's one of the best seasons in a long time, which was the Verstappen-Hamilton battle, which almost had the ending to that season was, you couldn't really write it any better. So it's definitely kind of you kind of have to get used to how it's kind of gotten back into normalcy where there's one team that's superior, but every once in a while you will have a team spring up and contend. And then it also is interesting, like you said, we know Red Bull's got the fastest car right now, but the battle for second is looking like it's going to be interesting between Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin. And that second place impacts how much money they get to use next year to hopefully bridge the gap. So there's fighting throughout the field, and even in qualifying for the race, Red Bull hasn't gotten every single first place start this year. So there is some variety, not as much as maybe one would ideally hope for, but it's not completely predictable.
Yeah, I would argue that F1 is kind of it's a sport that's filled with periods of domination, right? During the early 2000s, we had Schumacher just winning everything, and then early 2010s, Red Bull getting everything, and then Mercedes went through that period of dominance from 2014 to 2020. And it's those times within the transitions between those periods of dominance that are the seasons that are really great. Seasons 2008, 2010, and of course, Charlie mentioned, 2021. Those are kind of the seasons we live for as F1 fans. But even in the years where, one team is just dominating the top of the table, is the top of the finishing order, there's still a lot of action to be found. And my advice for you, Greg, is not to focus on the top 2 drivers, because we know basically who's going to win the championship already. My advice is to focus on the midfield battles, things like the battle for second place. Because if you just go into it looking at who's going to win each race, I think you'll be disappointed, and I'm sure you already have. My advice, just focus on the midfield, on the smaller battles, the battles underneath first place, because that's where the action is at.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. That's cool. All right, I guess another question kind of after that. No, I got a lot of questions. It's been a while since I put kind of any thought towards F1. But so we have Verstappen, probably going to be the champion again this year. What's it like for Hamilton? He had his years. I don't know. When I first heard about F1, he was already kind of at the top, I guess. How long had he kind of been number one? And now that he's kind of fallen away from that, what's that look like for him?
So Hamilton is still one of the best drivers on the grid, arguably the best behind Max Verstappen this year. As you probably know, a lot of it comes down to the team and the car that they have. So as Kenji mentioned, Mercedes had this period of dominance between like 2014 and 2020. And then in 2021, we had Red Bull emerge, or like specifically Max Verstappen emerge and challenge him. And eventually Max was able to kind of clinch the title in the last race of the season. So Hamilton, he has not really, he hasn't had the greatest season so far, but I wouldn't blame it on him. As you probably know, F1 comes down to the car maybe more than the driver, because you can have the greatest driver, but if you have a car that doesn't keep up with the top teams, then you're not going to succeed.
I guess a question with that then is Verstappen Verstappen kind of rising through the ranks so well? Was it that Red Bull was giving him a better car, or is he just a better driver overall?
I think it's a combination of both. And especially if you look at a season like 2021, there were periods when Red Bull weren't the quickest car. There were periods when Mercedes, their engine especially, was the strongest on the grid. If you look at Saudi Arabia, just the closing speed with which Lewis Hamilton was able to catch Verstappen on the straights is really indicative of that. The cornering ability, some of the races where Red Bull could really attack the corners with speed, is also an indication of that. But the point is that in order to win the F1 championship, you have to have the best package. You have to have the best driver. Maybe not the best driver, but a strong driver and a strong car. And whoever is most consistent in that wins the championship.
Yeah, and you still have your teammate that's got equal machinery that you have to compete against. And then go back to Hamilton. So Hamilton, I believe he won the championship as a rookie in 2007 with McLaren. And
wasn't it Raikkonen who won?
Oh, no, it was 2000 yeah, you're right.
8, yeah. 08 was when he won.
Oh, okay, yeah.
McLaren.
It was as a...
With Massa in Brazil.
Right. Okay. I thought that was the Braun GP year, but never mind. That was 09. Okay. So not as a rookie, but he was very good as a rookie too. He almost won it. So as a sophomore, he won the championship with McLaren. Was with them up until I think 2013 when he kind of shocked everyone by going to Mercedes, who kind of out of nowhere developed this incredible car, and he won 6 out of 7 years in a row, all but 2016, I believe.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he's undoubtedly a great driver. The times he lost the title was to Verstappen and Rosberg, and Rosberg was a really good driver too. So, and Verstappen that season had its own controversies, and it's arguable who deserved it. I think over the course of the season, Verstappen was probably the better driver, but in the title deciding race, Hamilton kind of get robbed. So it's kind of whatever you think.
Okay, yeah. So I guess the follow-up question is right now, I should remember if I asked this question. So does Red Bull have a better car than Mercedes right now?
Much.
Definitely, yeah.
So how does that work, though, then, with the cars? I mean, they all look similar. I mean, are there guidelines they have to follow when they're building them? Because, I mean, when you see them all racing by, they look the same. But like you're saying, there's differences about them. Some cars are better than others. So, like, what's there about that?
So basically, like the FIA, for each season, they come up with a bunch of regulations that the teams have to follow when they're, developing their car. And this usually goes through a bunch of like regulation changes as well. I think the most recent one was in 2022, I think. So last year. And that kind of, extended the advantage that Red Bull had. But yeah, there are definitely like a set of rules that the teams have to follow. And yes, the cars do look really similar, but I think it's like in those intricate details, the intricate components, like the engine, the side pods, stuff like that, that really, amplify the differences between the teams' pace.
Yeah, so there are like strict guidelines, but within those guidelines, there is a little bit of leeway, and it's how you can And oftentimes the best cars or the most unexpected teams that succeed find like a loophole and exploit it, and they use that to their advantage. But if you look at like all 10 teams, like front wings, they'll all look slightly different. If you look at the like side pods, they're called, the things that kind of stick out to the side of the each side of the where the driver sits, those are all different. So there is, I mean, countless hours of the best like mechanics and engineers in the world trying to figure out how to manipulate the cars to make them more aerodynamic or optimize the speed and handling and all that. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, now that makes sense. Yeah, there's another question on my mind. Oh, right. So kind of how long has Verstappen been in F1? Is he so kind of new? Was this kind of sudden, him becoming the champion all of a sudden? Because I do remember hearing about that a lot last year. Or when it's not last year, it's whenever he claimed victory over Hamilton. So had he been in the race for a while? Is he relatively new to F1, or what are we looking at?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Kenji, but he came in 2016, or was it before that?
2014.
2014,
I think.
okay.
Got into Toro Rosso in 2014.
He's been in F1 for a while. He came in as a very young driver, so he's still in his 20s, and he's always been an amazing driver. But he came in, I think he was 17.
yeah, I think he was 17.
He was 17 when he first started racing. So he was an extremely young driver. And, you know, he's always been up there. He had teammates that were up battling with him. Like he had, you probably don't know who Daniel Ricciardo is, but he had him as you know who he is? Okay. So he had him as a teammate, and I believe that Ricciardo did better than him. But then in 2020, Red Bull kind of made this surge, and then in 2021, Verstappen finally made the battle. So he's been around. I mean, he's one of the older drivers on the grid, but he's only like 27, 28, something like that.
Yeah, he was. Sorry, go ahead, Greg. Were you going to ask questions?
No. Kenji, go ahead.
I was just going to mention he was the youngest driver ever to like race in F1. I guess to start, he's also the youngest race winner, I believe, when he won in Spain back in 2016. So yes, while he's been racing for the better part of like 9 years at this point, I would still like say he's more on the younger side. Like he's not a Lewis Hamilton, but he's definitely on the younger side of some of these like front running drivers, like Perez, and well, Bottas isn't really a front runner anymore, but you get the point, I think.
Yeah, he kind of was he would get wins here and there, even when Red Bull wasn't the best team and when Mercedes was dominating, which showed like how good he really was. But he was always kind of considered to be like a reckless, or not like reckless, but he would take risks and like make contact with people and just kind of very aggressive driver. And I think obviously he's got a car far superior than anyone else right now, but what's also allowed him to pull away from his opponents these last 2 years, which on the contrary kind of kept him in the battle with Hamilton when he did kind of outperform him that 1 year, was that he's been able to kind of be more conservative in how he drives and be patient and wait for the best opportunity to pass someone and not like like put your race in danger by being too aggressive. So he's definitely shown a lot of growth to become the best driver out there right now.
I guess this is more of an opinion. I want to hear all three of you's opinion right now, but would you say from what we've seen this season so far and last year, is there anyone who could potentially be challenging Verstappen in the next few years, or does it kind of look like he's kind of up there for now and will stay there for the time being?
This year, no one's going to challenge him. So he does have his teammate Perez. He has an opportunity to challenge him. Whether or not that can happen, I don't know, Verstappen's just such a dominant driver. Go ahead.
Well, no, I think my question was not. I mean, this year looks kind of solidified being Verstappen, but does it look like there's anyone who's showing signs this year that maybe in the next few years they could be challenging him?
I mean, yeah, there's definitely. I mean, there's a lot of drivers I think if you gave the car could at least put up a fight with him. Last year, Charles Leclerc for Ferrari was hanging in there for the first, 10 races or so. Maybe less than that, but he's very talented. Obviously, Hamilton. We've seen the oldest driver maybe ever, Alonso for Aston Martin, has been outstanding so far this year. He hasn't finished below 4th place, so he's been really good. And he's a 2-time champion way back in the day. Personally, I think Norris for McLaren could at least kind of put up a fight. He might not be able to beat Verstappen straight up, but I think he's very talented. But yeah, there's a lot of drivers that are pretty good, but I think given that Verstappen has the best car and he's probably going on 3 titles in a row, he's got to be considered the best. What do you think, Kenji? I kind of want to hear your take on that. Do you think there's anyone that could compete with Max?
Frankly, no. But I think Charlie, you kind of hit on the main point of the debate. It's really down to the car, and that kind of informs my thinking on this question because it doesn't look like anyone will be able to get a car that is competitive for Red Bull within the next few years. Now, obviously, F1 is really unpredictable, so you never really know. But I feel like we're entering into a period of Red Bull domination that is analogous to Mercedes' domination during the 2010s. Because as I mentioned earlier, kind of F1 is just a sport that's dominated by dynasties, like Mercedes and stuff like that. So until there's a new regulation change or I don't know, something happens to Red Bull and their car isn't good enough to compete, I don't think that anyone is going to be challenging Red Bull anytime soon, or Max Verstappen, that is.
Going off that, then, I mean, is the race even, I know it's kind of a weird question, but it's even fair at that point? I mean, if you're having a team with a far superior car, to where it's not even so much the skill of the driver anymore, it's depending more on, how good are your engineers, how good are your mechanics, how good are the people making your car. Is F1 even fair at that point? I mean, if you're getting these, I don't know who the lower teams are, but if they have cars that can't even compete with machines that Red Bull is cranking out, then, what's the point at that point?
It is unfortunate that there's teams that can't compete, but I wouldn't say that it's unfair because, when Mercedes were winning back in 2014, we weren't saying it was unfair, were we? So the only time where it becomes unfair is if the teams, they cheat, they break the rules. That's when it becomes unfair. But as long as they're staying within the regulations and each team is subject to the same rules, then I think we can still consider it fair. And yeah, there's some other factors, how much every team spends. But I mean, Ferrari spends more than Red Bull on F1, and they've been kind of a joke, to be frank, over the past few years. So yeah, it is unfortunate that there are teams that just dominate the sport, but I wouldn't say it's unfair, really.
Yeah, I think unfortunate is a pretty good word to describe it. I mean, they're trying to make new rules to kind of bring it closer together. It's the bottom team to the best team, which I think has kind of worked. And so now there's kind of a salary cap, basically so there's only so much money that teams can spend, but some teams don't even have enough money to fit that cap, so it doesn't really do anything for them. They're trying to aren't they? I think the last place team gets the most time in the wind tunnel, which is a thing that blows air, and they can see how the air flows over the car prototype. And so the last place team gets the most time, and the first place team gets the least, which is yet to be seen if that will make any effect, because it didn't this year. But I mean, yeah, you would hope that another team would be able to create something just as powerful, but that's kind of the cool part about the sport, is that like it's not just the racing, it's the people back in the factory are doing just as much. And if you make every car equal, it kind of takes that away, which is one of the kind of the coolest parts about the sport.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense thinking about that. That's kind of the risk of the game. Like, you might be racing against teams that are better than you, but might as well just try. And then, like you said, well, actually what you said was, I was just thinking about that. I mean, it looks like F1 isn't just down to the driver. It's down to the team and, like, making the best car. And it's not just going to depend on the skill of your racer. It's going to depend on how good is your team making their car. But, okay, no, that's cool. I guess those are the more simple questions I have. The next one I've been thinking about, and you all have made some mentions to it, kind of what are the inner politics of the teams that go on? Like you mentioned, there's been controversies before, teams having favorite players or favorite racers. So how do the politics, how does that work with upper management of teams? Like, what does that look like? Like, what goes on behind the scenes for teams?
So that's a really open-ended question, but I'll try my best to give, I guess, the starting answer almost. So each team is led by a team principal who manages all of the stuff that the team does. So, the engineering stuff, the political stuff, the financial side of things, stuff like that. And then there's the chief engineer who manages all of the mechanical almost parts of the car, but it's still subordinate to the team principal. And I guess just addressing the political part. There's a bunch of team politics that go on depending on the team's number one driver. So for example, with Red Bull, a lot of the times we've seen in the past that Red Bull has seemed to favor Max Verstappen over other drivers. So for example, Perez or Ricardo from a couple years ago. So there is a bunch of team politics that go on depending on each team's number one driver.
Yeah, and sometimes it does come to there's drivers can get upset with each other and they still have to work as teammates. I mean, you saw in the Australia highlights when the two pink cars crashed into each other. Those are teammates. They had to go talk about what happened after that. And those drivers already, they don't really like each other. They're teammates for the first time this year. I know. I'm trying to think of an instance where teammates didn't get along. I think back at
Ricardo and Verstappen.
Obviously they
years ago,
or Hamilton,
when they crashed in Baku,
or Hamilton and Rosberg.
Oh yeah, so Hamilton and Rosberg is kind of is a big one. So they were teammates for 3 years or 4 years, I think. 3 of which Mercedes was really, really good for. So the first year it was a title battle between the two. Hamilton won. The second year Hamilton kind of blew him out, and then the third year Rosberg won. And then he just retired right after winning the title. He just, even though he wasn't that old, he just called it quits. And they were good friends going into it, and then after those battles they didn't like each other at all anymore. And there's some good fan made documentaries on YouTube and stuff that are pretty interesting that I've seen that kind of go into that. But yeah, that's kind of the big one. Thanks for reminding me about that too.
And it doesn't even have to be within teams as well. If you go back to the 1990s with Senna and Prost, which is probably maybe the most famous rivalry in F1. Those two were on the same team, weren't they? So never mind. But yeah, the point is F1 is a very political sport, and there's a lot of infighting, both within a team and outside a team as well.
I don't know. Kenji, have you seen the movie Rush? It's the
I've
one
heard
about,
of it within like Lauda and Hunt
yeah,
right?
it's a really good
from
movie.
'76.
Yeah, it's a very,
Yeah,
very good movie. It goes into this one season where this driver James Hunt and Nicky Lauda, they were battling for the championship, and Lauda had this like massive crash that
yeah,
that like almost killed him, but he came back. Eventually, James Hunt like won the championship. But I feel like that's a really good movie of two drivers that kind of butted heads. But in the end, of course, they have a ton of respect for each other. So yeah, I mean, they always butt heads, but it's a very dangerous sport. They all have respect for each other at the same time. But yeah, I thought I'd just bring that movie up because it's really good, and I watched it not too long ago.
Yeah, and I think the documentary I saw about it's called the Silver War between the two Mercedes drivers. I think it's on YouTube, the Silver War by like F-Laws, F-L-O-Z. I don't know. He did a pretty good job with it. It goes into like, it's a lot of like interviews and stuff of the drivers and how they just goes through every race and how it finished. So it's pretty interesting. But yeah, there's definitely inter team conflict sometimes, or drivers that get along really well that get split up, and then that's weird too. So there's two different sides of being teammates. You can be friends, you could be enemies, or you could be kind of neutral. It's just you still have to work together because that's what the team needs.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Those are most of the questions I've had about it. I mean, I guess what are y'all looking forward, or what are y'all looking to? What are you looking forward to with this season? Like Kenji said, you like look more at the middle of the races and how those are all contending. So like, what surprised you so far this season? What are you liking about it?
So there's this team, Aston Martin. It's the team with Alonso on it, the driver that got third in Miami. But they've had a very good season, and they've been second in the Constructors' Championship. But right behind them is Mercedes, which have been the better team, like in the past. Or Aston Martin, like they've always been a team. They've gone through many different name changes. But they're battling for second, and it's a very interesting battle. Me personally, I think that Mercedes is going to take P2 or like second place in the Constructors' Championship. But if you're asking like what I'm looking forward to, I think the battle for P2 is very interesting, especially between those two teams.
yeah. I think also like the driver transfers part of F1 is also a very like intriguing part of the F1 circus. We call driver transfers in F1 like silly season because of how like I don't know what other word we can use to describe it, but ridiculous it can get at times. It's kind of like NBA free agency where you're just kind of like tuning in every day to hear the latest rumors and stuff like that. Once we get to the summer, so for example, with AlphaTauri, they've been talking about potentially replacing a driver named De Vries who hasn't really been performing as well as we hoped. So yeah, I think aside from like the championship stuff that Tim mentioned, the driver transfer part is also an interesting part of the sport that I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what happens.
Yeah. One thing I'm kind of interested to see is F1, obviously, as it's gotten bigger and more people know about it, has kind of started to introduce a lot more gimmicks. So they haven't been racing on as many like actual circuits. They do these races in the streets of different cities. But one that I think will actually be really cool if it does actually make the race kind of interesting is they're going to race on the like Las Vegas Strip this year at nighttime, which it's yet to be seen if it'll make a good race. But
Yeah, I think I saw news about that in the headlines. That looks pretty cool. Is that kind of a newer thing this year, having racers racing the streets of cities where normally they wouldn't race?
So they have these like street circuits that they've always had. So this upcoming week we have the Monaco Grand Prix, where they race around Monte Carlo, and then the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. That's also a street circuit. But last year they added the Miami Grand Prix race, which is right outside of where the Miami Dolphins play. And like I think we showed you a picture of like the paddock is in Hard Rock Stadium where the Dolphins play, and then of course Las Vegas. So street circuits have almost always been a thing. It's just that they've started to kind of bring more and more onto the calendar. And I think it's an interesting thing. Like Charlie said, I'm excited for Las Vegas because it could be a good race. And I think they're trying to like get new fans too, probably especially in America, because this year they have 3. They have Miami, Las Vegas, and then the Austin race still, which is up at Circuit of the Americas. So yeah, they've always been a thing. They're just like, I think they're just trying to get new fans in America. And in order to do that, they've added, in order to try to do that, they've added 2 more races.
Yeah. The next race, Monaco, is one of the oldest. I think they just had their like 75th anniversary of the race or something. Maybe even more than that. But yeah, it doesn't make it for a great race anymore because the street is extremely narrow. The cars are much wider than they were in the 1900s and much longer, so it's impossible to pass people. It's really boring, but it is a spectacle to see these cars going around this, like, I mean, it's like one of the richest cities in the world. It's really cool to see.
When's that Las Vegas race?
It's in November. It's the second last race.
Yeah, November 25th.
So how many more weeks are there left in the season right now?
So we're just at the start. So there's still we've got 5 races down, and I think there's 21 if they don't reschedule Imola. So we've got 16 more races. Were you saying something, Kenji?
Oh, nothing. I was just gonna add on to the point about Monaco. I think qualifying is one of the best parts of the season, kind of, where the race is kind of boring, but qualifying where everyone's just pushing on the limit and touching the wall and stuff like that. That's a really great part of the season. But yeah, that's all I had to add.
Yeah, and that actually might be that could be an opportunity for a team other than Red Bull to get a win, because if they can get pole position, win qualifying, it's going to be really difficult for someone to pass them on that track. So that could provide some interest if someone else can get on pole in Monaco.
And then that kind of brings me into another point, which is the strategy that goes into the F1 races. So as Charlie said, if a team could get pole in Monaco, it could be an easy win. But then there's the whole strategy part of it. It's when do you go and take a pit stop? Because if for example, Ferrari gets first place in qualifying, but they pit in lap 21, and then they have Verstappen out there on older tires, but he's just pushing it faster and faster, even faster than the Ferrari, and then he pits on lap 30. Then whenever he comes out of the pit stop, he's ahead of the Ferrari because of the strategy that goes into it. I just think that that's just something we haven't talked about this episode, and that's another thing which is very interesting, and that's Ferrari has a good car, and that's kind of the staple and what's been happening with Ferrari is that their strategy has kind of messed them up in many key races the past few years. They could have won many races, and their strategy has just been awful. So the strategy is another very interesting part to see in F1, because it could make or break your races.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. All right, well, that was everything I had to say about it. So, whatever y'all got.
Yeah, I think I could...
Greg.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Tim. Go ahead. Amen.
No, I was going to move on, but go ahead if you have a question for Greg.
Greg, I have a question. F1 or NASCAR?
F1. I know that's not
really?
I know that's not the most American thing to say, but Sure, NASCAR's cool, but they're just turning left for 5 hours and no, definitely F1. I know I probably surprised you with that answer, but
Well, that's the
Who's
right
your
answer.
favorite driver in F1 and in NASCAR? I don't know if you watch NASCAR, Greg, but who's your favorite driver in the two right now?
I don't even watch NASCAR, dude, so I don't know any of the drivers in NASCAR. Favorite driver in F1? I mean, I'm probably just going to say Verstappen from the little bit I've seen. I mean, he's crazy.
Can't forget about Brandon Brown from NASCAR.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
that's our boy.
That's our boy. I forgot. Brandon Brown. That's right. Now let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
All right. I take back my earlier statement. Brandon Brown is officially my favorite NASCAR driver and will remain so for the next few years.
Who did you say your favorite F1 driver was again? I completely missed that. Greg. Who did you say your favorite F1 driver
I
was?
said Verstappen.
Verstappen, okay. Gotcha.
All right. I think that basically concludes everything.
Do we want to talk about Imola first, or?
Yeah, I guess we could talk about Imola for a little bit. I mean, unfortunate what happened. Obviously, Norris was going to get on the podium if they had raced there, so that's tough. But
Is this normal? Like, does this happen a lot? Races getting canceled, or is this kind of a freak out? Like, is this a once in a while occurring thing?
Yeah, this is rare.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate though. Like, I guess there have been more in the past few years than ever because of like COVID. Because of course they had to cancel pretty much a whole season or almost a whole season. But this has been, I think it's been kind of the first like non-COVID related cancellation in a while. So yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I hope the race happens. Go ahead, Kenji. Sorry.
They don't usually like cancel races. Like I remember, like in like 2015, there was like a hurricane that hit Texas when there was the U.S. Grand Prix, and like it still went ahead even though it was like pouring down rain like every practice session. Like I was there and like it was really wet, so it usually doesn't happen. But since the situation in Italy is so bad, if you look at the pictures of the flooding, I guess it had to be canceled, and it was like the right decision to cancel it. So yeah, it doesn't usually happen though.
Yeah, obviously, we're hoping for the best for the people of Italy. It's tough times over there right now. I hope the race happens at some point this year. I think that track provides a lot of interest. Obviously, for me, my favorite driver, Lando Norris, has gotten podiums the last 2 times he's raced there. So, although it seems unlikely to happen this year, you never know. He definitely goes well there. But yeah, it's a pretty good track. It's like right in the middle of a neighborhood. There's just like this circuit. Like there's houses that can literally like, if you live there, you can just watch it. So it's a pretty cool little area.
Yeah, I hope it happens. I was looking at, or I have the calendar for the rest of the year pulled up right here. And I hope it happens, but it looks like if it did happen, it would create like a back-to-back-to-back or like 4 races in a row. So it's unfortunate that this didn't happen before like summer break. But of course, you know, it's more important to like care about the people over there because, I mean, it's a big deal. So I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't happen because there aren't that many, like, I don't know if there are any, it doesn't look like there are any, like, 2-week breaks. So if you were to kind of fit Imola in somewhere, it would just create, like a 4 races in a row, which is going to be, like, extremely exhausting. And I don't think that F1 would want to put the drivers through that.
Where's the next race going to be then? Where is it scheduled to be?
Monaco, right?
Yeah, Monaco's up next. That'll be not. Is it next week? Not.
Yeah, it's this week coming up.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be. I mean, it was actually it was a pretty solid race last year. Qualifying is always really interesting. But yeah, we'll have to get you to come watch a race with us sometime, Greg. Maybe U.S. or Canada is closer in the summer, so it'll be in our time zone. But yeah, that's basically all we got for y'all today. I hope you enjoyed our little Q&A with Greg. I hope it was informative for you, Greg. You learned some stuff about F1.
Yeah, no, I definitely learned a lot. Thanks for having me on. This was actually a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. But
yeah, we're gonna have maybe some more guests on. I know there's some interest among our friend group of people that are new to F1 like Greg or who are also fans. So from time to time we may have another special guest. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. We'll be back with some Monaco predictions next time. This is Inside the Paddock. Thank you for listening.